Welcome to Bet Sedek, a community of justice. Welcome to Bet Sedek, a community of justice. We're glad that you are all here in this Erev Shabbat meeting, and it's always
Welcome
a
to Bet
joy
Sedek.
to be with all of you. And we will get started right away. We already did have a prayer before this, but we will do a prayer with everyone here present. Let us pray. Eternal One, thank you for everything that you've done for us. Thank you for being with us throughout this week. And thank you for this Shabbat that you have set apart so that we could recognize you as creator, liberator, and a God of justice, and so that we could recognize your supremacy. Please guide us and lead us and help us so that we may draw closer to you and emulate your character. Lead us in the paths of justice for your name's sake. Help us so that we may live out your love and live as people created in your image and likeness. Be with us, guide us as we go through this short study. Be with us all, we pray. Amen. All right. And tonight we will be talking about a very special subject. It will basically be about the mark of the beast. And this message is applicable to anyone, any human being, but it will be specifically directed to White Seventh-day Adventists. It will be directed to White Seventh-day Adventists. And the reason why it's directed to White Seventh-day Adventists is directed out of love. That's why it's directed to White Seventh-day Adventists. It's directed out of love. The reason why it's directed towards White Seventh-day Adventists is because I see danger looming a lot of White Seventh-day Adventists, and I would like to help warn White Seventh-day Adventists so they do not be deceived. All right, and that's very important. So if we could give it a title, it would be, are you loyal to God's supremacy or white supremacy? So if we could give it a title, that's basically what I'm trying to look at, where anyone could get the mark of the beast. But there's an element in the mark of the beast that's often overlooked, and it's the racial element of Sunday worship that started from supersessionism or replacement theology. And the change came through Europeans, Romans that caused a gradual shift from Shabbat to Sunday. And Sunday sacredness have been maintained by white supremacy. And so the danger is that a lot of Seventh-day Adventists, white Seventh-day Adventists, who really believes in Shabbat, but are indifferent in terms of racial matters, in terms of white supremacy, racism, may end up choosing Sunday sacredness over Shabbat because they do not want to anger their fellow whites. They want to be in good standing with members of their race. So they want to be loyal to other whites. They don't want to be seen as a Jew lover or a Negro lover. And so just to have good standings socially, they'll just not say anything and just go on ahead and get Sunday sacredness. So this is something that very important we want to look at. So we're gonna go super fast today. We're not gonna be sharing any slides, so we just need you all to lock in. Let's first go to Isaiah 52, verse 7. That's where we're going to first, Isaiah 52, verse 7. All right. All right. In the Tanakh, Isaiah 52, verse 7. All right, let's go there. And this is what it says. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, proclaiming shalom, bringing good news of good things, announcing liberation and saying to Zion, your God reigns. All right. So here we see many elements in this verse. In this verse, we see a lot of things. We see it talking about good news. We see it talking about shalom. We see it talking about liberation. And then we see and when it says liberation, that's Yeshua, which means rescue or liberation. And we see it talking about God reigning, God's reign. And remember, the foundation of God's reign is Mishpat and Tzedek. All right? Mishpat and Tzedek. It says that in Psalm 89, verse 14. Mishpat and Tzedek. And so Tzedek is justice, just relationships with others, and helping others. That's what Tzedek means. All right? So when we look at this verse, it tells us how God's reign goes with good news, goes with shalom, goes with liberation, not only later, but the here and now. And so that's what we're looking at. So we need to ask ourselves, are we under God's reign? Are we under the Supreme One's reign right now? And this is part of the good news because the foundation of God's throne is justice. That's very, very important. And we need to really, really keep that in mind. All right. Now let's turn to, so what we are preaching is the good news that goes with shalom. And to get to the state of shalom, you must go through tzedek. You must go through justice to arrive at the state of shalom. Now let's go to Daniel chapter 3, and we're gonna get an image of how the mark of the beast will look. So we're gonna quickly look through Daniel chapter 3. Let's go to Daniel chapter 3, and we're gonna read it very quickly to get an idea how the mark of the beast will look. All right. And so you got to ask this question. Remember, this could benefit all peoples, but I just really want for White Seventh-day Adventist or any white Shabbat keeper to really pay attention because this is a danger that I see that while Sabbath keeping, they're gonna have to choose between keeping Shabbat or being loyal to other white Christian nationalists. And you might think, well, no, we're gonna choose a Shabbat. But history has shown that when when the choice came in front of a lot of white Christians, they aligned with their fellow whites. And so this is why we want to go through this. So remember, the question is to you, White Seventh-day Adventists, are you loyal to God's supremacy or to white supremacy? Now, if you say God's supremacy, then that means you should be against the system and religion of white supremacy. You should stand up for justice. But see, when you stand up for justice, they call you Marxist. They call you all types of names. That's what they call you, all types of names. Marxists, social justice warriors, liberals, they call you all the names. They'll call you Jew lover, Negro lover, apostate. And then just so you could be scared and then to say, oh no, well, I don't believe in those things. Well, are you going to choose God's supremacy, the sign of his supremacy, which is Shabbat, and for white supremacy and Sunday sacredness? Because remember, the truth without justice is a lie. So let's go to Daniel chapter 3. All right, we're gonna skip. This is the image of the Nebuchadnezzar's image was set up, and now he called for everyone in the empire, in the Babylonian Empire, to bow down to the statue. So we're gonna read this. We're gonna start from verse. We're gonna start from verse 4. And a herald proclaimed, people, nations, languages, you are ordered that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, harp, zither, lute, bagpipe, and the rest of the musical instruments, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. Verse 6. Whoever does not fall down and worship is to be thrown immediately into a blazing hot furnace. That's exactly what's going to happen during the mark of the beast crisis. It's either bow down or die. That's basically the mark of the beast crisis. Bow down or die. You'll either die a slow death or a fast death. They'll either kill you or a slow death, enslave you, and you won't be able to buy and sell. Read Revelations 13. That's what it says. All right. So then it says, verse 7, therefore, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, harp, zither, lute, and the rest of the musical instruments, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar, the king, had set up. So there were people of other ethnicities that also bowed down. Remember, there were thousands of Jews that were enslaved and colonized, and they bowed down too. Verse 8, but then some Kasdim approached and began denouncing the Jews. Notice how it says they began denouncing the Jews. They said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, may the king live forever. Your majesty, you have ordered that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, zither, lute, bagpipe, and the rest of the musical instruments is to fall down and worship the golden statue. And verse 11, and whoever does not fall down and worship is to be thrown down into a blazing hot furnace. Follow, please, follow. Verse 12. There are some Jews whom you have put in charge of the affairs of the prophets of Babel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these men, your majesty, have paid no attention to you. They do not serve your God, and they do not worship the gold statue you set up. Verse 13, in a raging fury, Nebuchadnezzar ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. When the men had been brought before the king, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, is it true that you neither serve my gods nor worship the gold statue I have set up? All right, then, if you are prepared, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, harp, zither, lute, bagpipe, and the rest of the musical instruments, to fall down and worship the gold statue, very well. But if you won't worship, you will immediately be thrown into a blazing hot furnace. And what God will save you from my power then? Listen, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, your question doesn't require an answer from us, your majesty. If our God, whom we serve, is able to save us, he will save us from the blazing hot furnace and from your power. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will neither serve your gods nor worship the golden statue which you have set up. See, that's the determination that we need to have. That's the determination that we need to say that no, we're not going to stand up for your local gods, your Babylonian God. We're going to stand up for the supreme God, and he's going to stand with us. And even if we were to die, that's okay as well. All right. So then he got mad, and then he ordered that they overheat the furnace, and the men who threw them in, they even died. The men that bound the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then eventually I'm going to verse 24. Suddenly Nebuchadnezzar sprang to his feet, alarmed. He asked his advisors, did we throw 3 men bound into the flames? They answered the king, yes, of course, your majesty. But he exclaimed, look, I see 4 men not tied up, walking around there in the flames unhurt. And the fourth looks like one of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar approached the opening of the blazing hot furnace and said, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, you servants of God's supreme, come out and come here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego emerged from the flames. The viceroys, prefects, governors, and the royal advisors who were there saw the fire had no power on the bodies of these men. Not even the hair was singed. Their clothes looked the same, and they didn't even smell of fire. Notice that Nebuchadnezzar said, God supreme, El Elyon, because he automatically realized that the God that these Hebrew young men were serving must be the supreme God. He must be the supreme God. He must be that. That's very important for us to keep that in mind. And this is why it says El Elyon, the supreme God. All right. So this is what we have to keep in mind. The mark of the beast will be very similar to this, except this was regional. So of course, Nebuchadnezzar had power within his Babylonian empire, but it wasn't a worldwide empire. So, but and when you look at the statute, and when you look at the vision and the different beasts, You see that it started with Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Now, if you go to, I'm going to quickly go to Daniel chapter 7, verse 23, and this is what it says. Daniel 7, verse 23. It says, this is what he said. The fourth beast will be the fourth kingdom on earth. It will be different from the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, and crush it. That precisely is white supremacy. That's the papal system of white supremacy, started in papal Rome. So King Nebuchadnezzar had a powerful empire, but it was still regional. Then you had Medo-Persia. Then you had Greece. But then you had Rome, which, yes, the Roman Empire was a vast empire, but then it sprang out. Then you had the doctrine of discovery. Then you had colonization. All of that was sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church. Then you had the Protestant Reformation that simply opposed the authority of the Pope, but never opposed its white supremacy racism. And then you have the white church today. So now we're asking the question, you, white Christian, white Seventh-day Adventist, white Shabbat keeper, will you align with empire? Will you align with the system, with the religion of white supremacy? Or will you align with God's supremacy that even King Nebuchadnezzar, he saw El Elyon. He understood El Elyon when he saw those three Hebrew young men in the fire. He's saying this has to be, this is what you call supreme. So we're going to look at a few different sources. Let's look at a few different sources. All right. First, for us to establish a foundation, and I'm gonna give you the books and the page numbers, and then you guys could look them up because we're gonna have to go fast. All right, this is a book called Living in the Shadow of the Cross by Paul Kivel. All right, Living in the Shadow of the Cross by Paul Kivel. This is what it says in the preface in page 15 and 16. And please take note of this. Researching the history of racism led me to believe. Remettez avec les Nashamdea, s'il vous plaît. Remettez avec les Nashamdea, s'il vous plaît. Researching the history. Sorry for the noise. Researching the history of racism led me to understand that before Europeans understood themselves to be white, they thought themselves as Christian. Let me read that one more time. Researching the history of racism led me to understand that before Europeans understood themselves to be white, they thought of themselves as Christian. All right? I just want to make sure that that's etched into our brains. All right? What he's saying is that Europeans never called themselves white. They thought of themselves as Christian. So basically, they thought of Christian as a race, as a heritage, as a race. All right? And let me continue. He says, Jews, pagans, Muslims were the longstanding others. When encountered, Native Americans and Africans became new heathens in the same good-evil equation. It was only when some Jews and Muslims, and subsequently Native Americans and enslaved Africans, began to convert to Christianity that white Christians felt the need to draw an uncrossable line, meaning that's when they felt the necessity of calling themselves white, because too many people started to become Christians. And they thought Christian meant white. It meant European. It meant pan-European. I'll continue reading. It says, even if members of these groups became Christian, they would still be ineligible for participation in society because they were not white. Being a white Christian, and it was assumed male, became the criterion for being fully human. So Christian meant fully human. It meant a white person who's fully human. So the only person who could be a Christian was a European person. All right. So this is what Paul Kivel said in his book. So really keep that in mind, because you'll understand the other things that we will speak about. So now let's look at this now. All right, we're going to be looking at a few sources. This is from a book called White Evangelical Racism on page 8, White Evangelical Racism by Dr. Anthea Butler, White Evangelical Racism. All right, let's keep that in mind. And let me read this right here. It says, listen carefully. For evangelicals, Christianity is whiteness as well as belief. It is this conflation that causes evangelicals to ignore their racism. They truly believe that their Christianity is a race, and this comprises an all-encompassing identity. All right? So it's very clear. So basically, to them, Christianity is whiteness. And remember, Christianity, that term came into play when did the term Christianity come into play? It came into play to promote racism against the Jews. That's why the term Christianity is not in the Bible, not even once. The term Christian is in the Bible 3 times, mostly as an outsider symbol. It was just a Greek term that meant little anointed ones or follower of the anointed one. But when but when Ignatius used it, he used it during a period of strong anti-Jewish racism, strong anti-Jewish sentiments, where he tried to differentiate between Judaism and then he called it Christianity. Tried to make it two competing systems, and then they tried to basically throw the Passover away, and then shifted from Shabbat to Sunday, and that started. One of the heavy hitters was Ignatius, who was racist against the Jews. That's one of the first instances of the term Christianity. Very important. All right. Because God did not start Christianity. He did not start a religion called Christianity. What he did, he had a covenant with a people. And then he established a new covenant in Jeremiah 31. But he didn't start a religion called Christianity. All right. So Christianity is a race. All right. This is what she's saying. And then she's saying to evangelical Christianity is whiteness. Christianity is a race as well as belief. All right. And that's just something to really keep in mind. All right. Now we're going to look at another quotation here. And this quotation is by Carter G. Woodson. This quotation is by Carter G. Woodson on page 4 on the book The Miseducation of Negro. And this is what it says. In schools of theology, Negroes are taught the interpretation of the Bible worked out by those who have justified segregation and winked at the economic debasement of the Negro, sometimes almost to the point of starvation. Deriving their sense of right from this teaching, graduates of such schools can have no message to grip the people whom they have been ill-trained to serve. All right. So here he was talking about Carter G. Woodson and talked about how black ministers preached from white theology to black people every Sunday. All right, very, very, very important in terms of what was going on. So yeah, we really need to keep these things in mind in terms of when we're talking about white theology, all right, which is a lot of assumptions from white culture, and then we bake it into the Bible and teach it as if it's the gospel. All right, very, 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 very important. Oftentimes we talk about syncretism, but we look at it from non-Western cultures when there's a lot of syncretism from European paganism that are introduced to Western Christianity, and that's why it's accepted because Christianity is already Western. It's already Western, and that's important for us to keep in mind. I'm going to look at the book called Christian Supremacy. All right, I'm just going to look at a few more sources, and then we will end the book called Christian Supremacy, and and I want you to listen to this to see how a lot of this got started. All right. and how if you do not stand up for justice now, even if you understand the truth of the Sabbath, if you do not embody the justice, the tzedek, the justice of Yeshua, the anointed one, then you're in danger of accepting the mark of the beast. Even if you know the truth about the Sabbath and or you're a third or fourth or fifth generation Seventh-day Adventist. But if you don't understand justice, what will happen when other white Christian nationalists are standing up for Sundays and saying, yes, we need to reclaim America, and then you will be fearful of offending other whites. Because when they see you accepting Shabbat and say, no, me and my family, we keep the Shabbat, they're gonna treat you like a Jew. They're gonna treat you like a black person. And a lot of white Seventh Adventists never they don't know how it feels to be treated like a non-white person, and then they'll go on ahead and to be in good standing with other fellow whites, they're gonna go and neglect the Sabbath. All right. So let me just read this and then so you can understand the history behind it. This is from the book called Christian Supremacy. Reckoning with the Roots of Anti-Semitism and Racism. This is a book I believe every white Seventh-day Adventist should read. It's called Christian Supremacy by Dr. Magda Tetter. Very important. This is a Princeton University published book. It's a scholarly book. It's not a hard read. It's not a hard read. Don't be intimidated by the size or the title. Every white Seventh Adventist should read this book in light of the mark of the beast. So you don't be fooled of accepting Sunday worship because you neglected or rejected justice, because you rejected tzedek, all right, which is all over scripture. All right. So let us take a look at it. Um, it says, for Christians, Jews became necessary contrast figures created and used to validate Christians' claims of theological replacement and superiority. All right. There's a line that I see that's important. Let me start reading from up there. Okay. It says the formation of Christian identity, indeed Christian identity, was constructed not only in opposition to Judaism, but also in terms of Judaism. All right. And it says for Christians, Jews became necessary contrast figures created and used to validate Christians' claims of theological replacement and superiority. With political power gained by Christians and the Christian empire taking shape in the fourth century, Christian supersessionism became Christian supremacy with its theological superiority now embedded into law and Jews specifically targeted in degrading legislation. Over the centuries in medieval Europe, Christian supremacy became more deeply entrenched in law, theology, and culture, clashing at times with historical reality. When real Jews of flesh and blood did not easily fit into the ideas Christians held about them. This Christian supremacy turned into white Christian supremacy with the colonial expansion in the modern era. Its Christian identity never lost, even if individuals associated with it might not have been devoted churchgoers. So even if you weren't a devoted churchgoer, you still were a Christian. Because remember, Christian meant white. And before they called themselves white, they called themselves Christian because Christian meant race. And the term Christianity was first and heavily used by Antioch, who was an anti-Jewish racist and who helped shift from Shabbat to Sunday. His name is Ignatius. All right. So let's really keep that in mind. And let me read this portion. The following pages explore the relationships between Christian theology and law to demonstrate how legal and theological frameworks that were created centuries ago within Western Christianity led to social and legal exclusion of and in modern times also a denial of equality to Jews and black people. The crux of the argument then lies in the Christian sense of superiority, a mental habit that developed first in a religious sense with regards to Jews and then transformed also into a racialized dominance, accelerating when Europeans expanded their political reach beyond Europe and established slaveholding empires in the early modern period. That's on page 4 of the same book called Christian Supremacy. Every white Seventh-day Adventist should buy and read that book. uh, Read the entire book, and then you'll thank me later after reading that book. All right, because you need to understand replacement theology and supersessionism is a foundation of anti-Jewish racism, and that's why they felt the need to shift Shabbat to Sunday because they wanted to preserve their Christian identity. Remember, Christian means white. They wanted to preserve their white identity. They was like, no, Jews are inferior to us, and so they threw away their Passover and said, no, we're gonna have our Easter. Forget about the 14th of Nisan. We will have this on Sunday, and then eventually they say, well, it'll be Easter every Sunday. And then after that, they gave you a pretext and said, well, the Easter is about the resurrection of white Jesus. When Yeshua of Scripture never said this is what it should this is what Sunday should memorialize. So, but they just gave you that pretext when it was all about racism against the Jews, and then they had a lot of Roman sun worshippers, and that was a secondary reason. And there were other factors in there as well, but the core of it, the core of the shift from Shabbat to Sunday was because of racism against the Jews. And the foundation of that was what? Supersessionism. Supersessionism, replacement theology. They basically thought, hold on. No one's replacing us. I will not be replaced. I'm not going to be drafted into nobody. I'm the root. I'm the foundation stock. I am the new Israel. The white man is the new Israel. And then other people can be drafted into me. I'm the chosen people. We are the chosen people, the white people. So this is how this all started. And then they said, no, we need to make a drastic difference between the Jews and Christians. Remember, Christians meant European. And then that's why you have white Jesus. That's why you have the Roman cross. And that's why you have Sunday sacredness. All due to racism. And then when people call Christianity as a white man's religion, we're quick to say, no, well, that's such a foolish accusation. That doesn't make any sense. But but you can't if you were to separate white supremacy from Christianity, you wouldn't even recognize it anymore. You wouldn't even recognize it. So get that book, Christian Supremacy by Dr. Magda Tetter. Christian Supremacy by Dr. Magna Tetter, and that needs to be read. And we'll end with another book by Dr. Christopher Norris. It's about confronting white supremacy in the American church. All right, you could just Google it, confronting white supremacy in the American church. And this professor, he admitted that he he didn't think about like white supremacy, racism. He didn't think about all that stuff long ago in his past. And um I like when people are honest and things of that nature. He talks about, color blindness and how um how he was like, a part of that group. Like he just didn't want to, he didn't see that racism, white supremacy played a role in theology or anything like that. So I'll read a few things that he has said in his book. All right. There's so many things I can read, but and so he's gonna give you the history. So let us look at this here. I'm reading from page 39, and this is what it says. And this chapter is called the theological origins of white supremacy. He said white supremacy was not the result of setting theology aside, but was precisely a theological and ecclesial invention. The theological origins of white supremacy lie at the point which religious difference morphed into racial difference, especially around the status of Jewishness. That is, before Europeans, explorers, and slave traders set foot in Africa or America, white supremacy appears to develop out of Christian, and we already told you what Christian meant. White supremacy appears to develop out of Christian attempts to identify Jewishness as a race prior to a well established account or definition of race. All right, very important. So how you see how white supremacy started. All right, it started with religious difference, and then it morphed into racial difference. And then Europeans who call themselves Christian, not white, Christian, and then they trying to give the Jews a status. They're trying to That's how the race started to be established because they saw Jews as an inferior race, and they saw themselves as Christians as a superior race. All right. So this is what I had to do with identity. Very, very important. He said the church seemed almost obsessed with marking and ensuring Jewish difference. So remember, Christian was a race first and then a religion. All right. Christian meant white. And now we're going to page 40 here and listen carefully. It says, these religious and political events suggest public and ecclesiastical practices of supersessionism functioning to assign Jewishness a racial designation and then replace it through a badge or execution with a white Christian center. This spiritual victory over its enemies linked Christian faith in European genealogy at the very moment European Christians began encountering ethnic others in the Americas. All right, so we'll leave that there with that quotation. All right. And let me tell you, let me show you a couple of his quotes, how he shows accountability and what he's calling the white church to do. And this is what all white Seventh-day Adventists can do. He said white supremacy was not simply justified by Christian theology, but invented by it. He said, I am arguing that the origins of white supremacy reside in theology itself. Thus, I believe the white church will never fully confront and contest the depth of the problem, nor our responsibility for it, if we do not begin to see it as a failure of our theology itself. All right, that's very important. Very important. And this is what I want you all to take heed to. My fellow white Seventh-day Adventist. He says, I believe the white church in America should take responsibility for white supremacy. This is not an angry black person talking. This is Dr. Christopher Norris. All right, this is Dr. Christopher Norris. This is a white man talking. All right, it's a white man talking. He says, I believe the white church in America should take responsibility for white supremacy by demonstrating its theological origins and continuing presence in inflecting and corrupting even the most well-meaning white theology. The shift from Shabbat to Sunday started. The biggest driving factor was supersessionism. That's just a fancy word for saying replacement theology. That's basically the European church saying that, well, we replace the Jews. We replace Israel. We're God's chosen people now. And one thing he did say something about that in page 47. Um, in the same book that I was just reading, let me read page 47, well, 46. Above that, he has something called Christian superiority. And he wrote that, as Janine Hill Fletcher summarizes, quote, Christian supremacy underwrote white supremacy. And then he talks about supersessionism. The impact of Christian superiority was most evident in the relation between Christianity and Jewishness. See, we're talking about a people group, we're talking about ethnicity, we're talking about culture. As the just rendered historical account suggests, the borders of European/slash Christian identity were clarified by Jewish otherness, even before the first explorers set sail. So, see, I love how he laid it out because he put European/slash Christian. Because when you're talking about identity, European meant Christian and Christian meant European in terms of identity. That's why when people say, well, you're supposed to be Christian before black. Okay. You're supposed to be Christian before black. Okay. Well, Jesus wasn't a Christian. Paul was not a Christian. Paul said, I'm a Jew. He was a follower of Yeshua, the anointed one of Israel, because as Yeshua is the anointed one of Israel, it's not another covenant. It's within the same Israel. But when they established their own identity, the European Christian identity, basically the first major other was the Jew. Now there were others, the Muslim, those other people, but the first one was the Jew, and that's why they had to get rid of the Sabbath. And that's why historically white people have been very uncomfortable with the Sabbath, very uncomfortable with the Sabbath, and it's just seemed cultural. They're cultural at home with Sunday, cultural at home. And that's why all through slavery, the non-white world received Sunday sacredness through what? Through slavery, through chattel slavery. They received slavery, Sunday worship from the plantation, from white people, from white slave masters. And the only time some white Adventists experience this is during the chain gangs when you were in a chain gang by working on Sundays. And that's when you see there's a couple of Adventists, there's even an Adventist pastor, and then you see that there was black people there too. And that's when they felt how it felt to be treated like a black person. Because during the Mark of the Beast crisis, every Shabbat keeper will be treated like a black person. Every Shabbat keeper, you'll be treated like a black person. That's why a lot of white Seventh-day Adventists will not be able to hold on because they're like they don't know how it feels to be treated like a black person. All right, so that's just something to keep in mind. That's why we need to stand for justice now. We need to stand against white supremacy, racism now. White supremacy and racism is intertwined in Sunday because it was born in racism. It's maintained in racism in the climax, and the climax of it will end in racism with the Mark of the Beast crisis. And that's why you're hearing about white Christian nationalism. People think, oh, the rise of white Christian nationalism. There's no such thing. There's not a rise. It's always been here. All right. The papal system of white supremacy. So let me read this. It says, the troubling instability of Jewish difference, Daniel Boyarin writes, shaped both Christian European self-image and their reactions to those they encountered in the course of exploration and conquest. Remember, we're talking about supersessionism, replacement theology. The seeds of supersessionism were planted in the Christian faith at its outset. Keep that in mind. All right, at its outset, nurtured through the church fathers, including Justin Martyr, and made explicit in Reformation texts like Martin Luther's, which enabled the earliest Spanish explorers to begin to conceive of the newfound peoples as racially other. Rather than recognizing Paul's caution to Gentile Christians to remember that they have been grafted in to the root of Israel, where Paul says, it is not you that support the root, but the root supports you, so that you should not boast. That's Romans 11, verse 17 to 18. Christians came to believe themselves to be the first fruits, the elect. So remember, Europeans, those Europeans or Christians, they call themselves Christians. It was heritage, white, it meant white. So those Christians, those Europeans said, "Oh, no, we're the new Israel. We're the root. We're the chosen, we're the fruit, we're the first fruits. I'm not going to be grafted in. I'm not going to be no branch, no wild branch. I'm supreme. We're supreme. Europe is supreme. Rome is supreme. You better bow down to Rome's supremacy." And so, yeah, you had those church, Justin Martyr, you had Ignatius, you had all these councils, and then you had supersessionism. So European Christianity took Israel's story as its own. And that's why when Europeans came to Turtle Island, which they called the New World, they called themselves New Israel. And then they saw the indigenous peoples in Turtle Island as what? The new Canaanites. So that's what replacement theology does. Replacement theology is the root of white supremacy. And the biggest sign of replacement theology is what? Is Sunday sacredness. It's very important. Is the biggest sign of replacement theology is Sunday sacredness. So, to my fellow white Seventh-day Adventist members who may say, "Well, I'm already in line with the Sabbath. My family, we've been keeping the Sabbath for third and fourth generations. My granddad taught at Andrews. He had his doctorate in theology, and that's great. But I admonish you to read the Southern work. I admonish you to read Sabbath Roots by Charles Bradford. I admonish you to read the book Christian Supremacy by Dr. Magna Tedder. I admonish you to read Living in the Shadow of the Cross by Paul Kivel. I admonish you to read this book by Christopher Norris, Confronting White Supremacy in the Christian Church. I admonish you to do research. Read the book From Sabbath to Sunday by Dr. Samuel Bakayoko, and read the chapter where it talks about the strong anti-Jewish sentiments and how that was one of the core factors of the shift from Sabbath to Sunday, because it was the main shift was due to racism against the Jews. Europeans or Christians, remember they call themselves Christians, but it meant white. It meant the term white wasn't a term then, but that's what they meant. They only changed it when other non-whites, non-Europeans became Christians. And they said, "Well, we can't call ourselves Christians, because everyone's a Christian now." But they was like, "Hold on, but you can't change your skin color." And so it was just religious difference. So the core of white supremacy is Europeans claiming religious supremacy, supersessionism, replacement theology, thinking that they are the new Israel. And then that's why they say, "Well, I'm not going to keep the Shabbat. I'm not going to keep the Shabbat. No, we need to have our own Sabbath." And that's how they came with Sunday, which is the white man Sabbath. So I'm asking you, Seventh-day Adventists, will you stand up for Tzedek? Will you allow Hashem? Will you allow the Anointed One? Will you allow the Creator to lead you in the paths of Tzedek, to lead you in the paths of justice, as Psalm 23 verse 3 says? Will you allow him to do that? This is very important for you to keep in mind. Because if you don't do that, if you do not walk in the paths of Tzedek, when that pressure comes, you're just going to align yourself with your fellow whites. When you look at, I'm going to end with this story. When you look at, for example, the Scottsboro young men who were falsely accused of raping two white women, and they basically lied on those multiple black men. There were a lot of white people. Well, the doctor, after he did the assessment on the white women to see if they were really raped, he found out that they weren't really raped. And then when he was asked, "Okay, well, will you tell the public and let them know that, yes, you're a physician, and then you looked at the evidence and you did a test and there was absolutely no rape." He talked about how he cannot do that because everyone knows where he lives, and before he goes home, what would happen? he would be killed. His family, his home would be burned down. And that shows you the power of white supremacy, where you can't even stand for the truth. Why? Because you fear. You fear of what other white people will do to you. You fear what other white people will do to you. So for you, you white Seventh-day Adventists, will you stand up for justice, even though your house may be burned down? You won't be able to buy or sell. You won't be living in comfort. You will be identified as a Jew lover, as a Negro lover, as unfit. You will be looked on as, well, you're a traitor to other white people, or you're not proud to be white, you're not patriotic. Or they'll say, oh, you're a Mark Brown, or you hate white people. How are you white and you hate white people? You hate yourself. That's what you will be called by keeping the Shabbat, by standing with God's Shabbat keeping people, by being a part of God's Yisrael, by his remnant that keeps the commandment of Yeshua and is faithful like Yeshua. Revelations 14, verse 12. So please share this with any white Seventh-day Adventist, because this will be something that's hard for them. Now, all the non-white people, it's going to be extremely hard for them because we have been colonized to bow down to white supremacy. We've been trained to obey white people at all costs. If a white person says it, do it. We've been trained to think that white culture is supreme in our dress, in our names, in our thinking, the way that we're educated, the university school system, the way that we do research, the way that we think, the way that we function, the way that we write. Everything is according to the white standard. The way that you preach, the way that you hold a service, people will judge you. Hold on, are you doing it the way that white people set the standard too? And then every other standard, every other culture is trash. So we've been trained to bow down to white supremacy. Just bow down. Don't just bow down to it. Just, hey, it's here, and just bow down to it. So during the Mark of the Beast crisis, it's going to be very easy for non-white people to bow down because the white man said to worship on Sunday. And you've been listening to the white man your entire life because respectability politics, and I don't want to seem disrespectful and this and that. But the problem is that we're not supposed to obey God rather than man. But a lot of non-white people who are just used to just listening to what white people say automatically, not even challenging it, or say, hold on here, let me see what scripture says, or let me do this, or whatever the issue is. So when the mark of the beast comes, and obviously it's going to come with military power, the power of nuclear weapons, with all the military power of the nations, and everyone's going to back up the Vatican, the papacy, which is the Antichrist, the beast power, the second beast power, which is the United States of America. And, so all the non-whites people who've been colonized and trained to always submit and bow down. Every day, bow down to white supremacy, whether it be the workplace, for your degree, for your school, for everything. You just bow down to white supremacy, bow down. And then, so it's not going to be a hard jump to say, okay, well, let me just accept this Sunday. Because if you don't have justice in your heart, then the truth won't help you. Because a thief knows that he's not supposed to steal, but he doesn't have tzedek in his heart. He doesn't have justice in his heart. So knowledge will only get you so far. You need to embody justice, tzedek. So non-white people, that's the trap for them. You've been following white supremacy your entire life. And so for this Sunday sacredness, when it's legislated into law, if you weren't standing against white supremacy, and it's just going to be the next step is just to easily bow. But for white people now who are just indifferent, who says nothing against racism, they're going to say, oh, well, me, I don't see color. Oh, yeah, I'm Adventist. I go to Black Seventh-day Adventist churches all the time. Oh, I listen to Black pastors all the time and stuff like that. But nothing against white supremacy, racism. Never read Southern work. just nothing against white supremacy, nothing against slavery, no research against like the white Adventist pioneers said a lot against white supremacy, racism. They were abolitionists. They stood against the fugitive slave law. Where are these white SDAs today that are preaching full sermons about white supremacy, racism? Not just when George Floyd died, and they'll mention it in 30-second caveats or symposiums. Where the full Sabbath morning sermons, seminars, books being written. They do not want to offend their base. All right. So that's why we're doing this, because we want for we want people to see, we want White Seventh Adventists to see the trap, and we want you to be warned before that it comes. It's very important. We want you to be warned before it comes. And we'll tell you exactly why a lot of white churches don't preach against the sin of white supremacy. People say call sin by its right name. Yeah, every sin by its right name against except the sin of white supremacy. You could preach about fornication, adultery, not paying tithes, jewelry. You could even talk about not eating cheese, sin, this, vegetarian diet, this, all this and that. But here's the 10 main reasons why white churches or white pastors do not preach against the sin of white supremacy. And we need to understand that white supremacy is a part of Sunday sacredness. It's always been a part of Sunday sacredness, racism. All right. Number one, fear of alienating white members. They know if they talk about it, white members will feel offended, which shouldn't happen. If you're not a white supremacist, you're not a racist, you shouldn't feel offended. So yeah, they'll feel offended, and then they don't want to alienate white members. I'm Haitian. I do not practice Haitian voodoo. So if someone came and preached against Haitian voodoo, I wouldn't be against it. I wouldn't feel personally attacked just because I'm Haitian. So if you're white and I just say white supremacy, you shouldn't but that's the fear of alienating white members. Number two, institutional self-protection. Institutions are very slow in change, and they want to just protect themselves. And so to protect themselves, they're not gonna risk themselves by talking about a subject this deep and this serious. They just won't touch it. All right. Number three, cultural blind spots. There's some things they don't even see. They don't even see. It's just a cultural blind spot, which everyone has to some degree, but white culture being supreme have a lot of cultural blind spot that they don't see, and they don't even care if they don't see it, because they don't get punished for not seeing it. Um, so, but they have cultural blind spots, and so it's like, well, I don't see that. That never happens to me. I'm not. So that's the third reason. Fourth reason, avoidance of historical accountability. They fear, hey, if they talk about white supremacy, now you're gonna have to talk about how you've been, you know, they don't want to be held accountable, historically speaking. Then you'll have to talk about even black and white conferences in the Seventh-day Adventist churches, black churches in the Seventh-day Adventist churches. The only reason you have black Seventh-day Adventist churches because the white Seventh-day Adventist churches were racist. That's why they had to be started. That's why. Don't badmouth Oakwood and say, why do you have Oakwood? Number one, I was told to go to Oakwood when I was at Southern, and I went in the office and I was speaking to the administrators at Southern Adventist University, and I was simply speaking about how the theological department could be more intercultural. And the lady in the office, the reception in the office, she was just overhearing the conversation that I was having. This was a meeting that I was having with an administrator at the president's office at Southern Adventist University. And the receptionist and, well, the assistant to the president, she was like not far, probably like 10 feet away. And she was like, go to Southern. She was like, go to Oakwood. Go to Oakwood then. Go to Oakwood. Go to Oakwood. All right. So number five, the individualistic view of sin. So since they believe in only an individualistic view of sin, They only believe in individualistic salvation. That's why they say such things as accept Jesus as your personal savior. You never hear them talking about accept Yeshua as your collective liberator. They always talk about personal salvation, never about collective liberation. So that's one of the reasons, because they only have an individualistic view of sin. So they feel like, well, okay, well, if an individual white person is racist, then it's between him and God, and if he receives the grace of God, he won't be racist anymore. And that's how they solve problems. Individualistic view. But they'll talk about abortion, they'll talk about other social issues that are collective when they like it. But that's number five. Number six is fear of political labeling. Fear of political labeling. That's what they fear. Calling Marxists and all this stuff. Just like Dr. Conrad Vine, he preached a sermon and he talked about social justice, and he said, Marxism and all this stuff. But you're not gonna hear one Dr. Conrad Vine sermon against the sin of white supremacy. You're not gonna hear that because he would lose his base. He would lose his base. All right. Number seven, discomfort with self-critique. That just speaks for itself. Number eight, prioritizing institutional unity. So we could have this fake institutional unity where blacks and together are together for 1 hour, and we're singing Kumbaya, and we're singing Onward Christian Soldiers marching out to war with the Christ of Jesus going on before, singing these white Christian nationalism songs, and then we just think that that means we're united. Yeah, we're just united. Institutional unity. Yeah, let's preach on unity. We need to be united. Well, we need to be united in truth and justice, not in just fake unity and to publish. And so people will say, "Oh yeah, I seen a few blacks and white they were worshiping together in South Africa." That's a report that Amazing Facts gave when I asked them if they preached about against the sin of white supremacy, and that's what they gave me as their best evidence of Doug Batchelor and the Amazing Facts crew preaching to a mixed audience in South Africa, and how they're all singing hymns and together. That's the best evidence of preaching against the sin of white supremacy racism. So that's institutional unity facade. Number nine, different theological emphasis. That's why they don't preach that. White churches typically preach a white theology that pleases white people. Number 10, minimizing structural dimensions of sin. So the Bible talks about a structural dimension of sin, a societal mention of sin, missing the mark, society's missing the mark, people missing the mark, but white culture loves to truncate it into just individuals only, individuals only. So that's why most white churches don't preach against the sin of white supremacy, white pastors. And so that's just something to keep in mind. Those are 10 reasons. But white Seventh-day Adventists stand up for justice now, stand up for justice today. Yeshua says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst over justice, for they will be filled." He also said, "Blessed are those, happy are those who are persecuted for the cause of justice, for you will see the reign of Creator." That's what it says in Matthew chapter 5. In Matthew 6, Yeshua says, "Seek first the Creator's reign and his justice, his dikausune, his justice." So justice, tzedek, should be our priority. And when I'm looking at all of what's going on all around the world and seeing the open, blatant racism from Joel Webbin and other these people, it's not even covert, it's just overt and bold overt. And then you see the indifference of white Seventh-day Adventists who will just only talk about the Sunday law, only talk about but you have to understand that racism is spiritual. See, they'll say, "Well, I don't talk about politics. I don't talk about politics," or no, but I'm not talking about politics because white supremacy is a theological issue. It's a religious issue. So that's why I'm calling all of the white Seventh-day Adventist members, or you might not be a Seventh-day Adventist, but you might be Church of God Seventh Day. You just might be a white Shabbat keeper, or you might be a Messianic Jew, or you might be Jewish. You might be in a Messianic congregation. You're Jewish, but white passing, or consider yourself white as well. All I'm saying is that if other people identify you as white, or if you're a white Seventh-day Adventist or a white Adventist or a white Shabbat keeper, You have to be careful so you do not be more loyal to white people than to your creator. So remember, we were talking about, are you loyal to God's supremacy or white supremacy? God's supremacy is found in Psalm 92, where it says it's a good thing to give thanks unto the Lord and unto his name, El Elyon, which means God supreme, God the supreme. Shabbat is a sign of God's supremacy. Sunday is a sign of the white man's supremacy, of white supremacy's, it's white supremacy's mark. And that's why Sunday, when it's legislated into law, which will be the mark of the beast. It's the cultural mark of the beast now. Sunday is the cultural mark of the beast now, but it's not the mark of the beast in terms of legislation. It's a cultural mark of the beast. But when it's legislated into law, written into law, that's when it will be the mark of the beast. Are you going to be loyal to other white people? Love all people, but are you going to be loyal to them, or are you going to be loyal to your creator? It's very important. It's very important because I'm seeing a lot of people are overlooking the racial aspect of the Sunday law. The Sunday law is all about bowing down, or you can say worship, same thing, bowing down. But within the subject of bowing down, you have supremacy, you have authority. Who has the authority? Is it the creator or is it the white man? Is it white supremacy? Is it who's supreme? So remember, you may have the truth and say, well, I know Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11. I grew up Adventist, I grew up in the Shabbat. Okay, that's great. But remember, truth without justice